This is episode 81 of Our Modern Heritage, your resource for navigating your family culture. I'm your host, Jody Tathy. I'm excited to share this episode with you. I had the privilege of interviewing Hank Smith. I didn't know this about him. He studied trust relationships for his PhD, and that was the basis of this conversation. What is a trust relationship, and how do you develop one? And so this was a really powerful conversation that we had. I first met Hank a little over a year ago when he spoke at the homeschool conference that I attended, and he's so inspiring. He's so fun to listen to, and this ended up being kind of a little bit more serious conversation, but we touched on such crucial and important principles of developing trust and how that is so important to our family culture and our mental health. On the show today, I've got Hank Smith, PhD. Dr. Hank Smith grew up in St. George, Utah, and has an MBA from Utah State University. He also has a PhD from Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, where he works as an assistant professor. In addition to consulting Fortune 500 companies, educators, and parents, Hank loves meeting students at school assemblies around the country. Hank has also authored many books and audio CDs with Covenant Communications, including Be Happy, Simple Secrets to a Happier Life. Hank and his wife, Sarah, currently live in Mapleton, Utah, and Hank says, Sarah is amazing. She knows everything about me and still loves me.
Yeah, that's right.
They have 5 incredible, adorable children that look exactly like their mother. And Hank is running marathons and eating lots of ice cream. I'm with you, which is why he runs marathons. More than anything else, he loves being with his wonderful wife and children. Welcome, Hank. Thank you so much for being on the show.
You got it. I'm glad to be here, Jody.
I'm excited. So I met you last year. Like I said, I met you at the LDS conference last year. You gave the closing keynote address, and it was wonderful. It was so awesome. I still think about some of the things that you said, and I posted about them. Like, I really loved something that you'd said about your family culture is like riding a tandem bicycle with you and your wife. And I love that, that she's in the front steering and you're in the back pedaling powering the bike. I love that imagery and that analogy, because it was like, it really is true that both husband and wife, need to we have roles, we have part of this family culture.
I was just say she's the vision, she does the steering, and I do the muscle.
I love that too, because I just read this book, Start With Why, Simon Sinek, and he always says that in a successful partnership, there's like the vision person and then there's the doer person that always, it makes the partnership thrive. And so I think that's a really awesome imagery that you shared that I still think about. I'm like, that's so true.
Yeah. And it takes a while to get that figured out, right? To figure out who's going to fill what role. It wasn't like the day we were married, we understood how this was going to work, but that's kind of, where our strengths are. She's the visionary. She kind of has an idea. She looks ahead, and I love to work. She always says, you like to do things 3 or 4 times harder than they need to be. So I'm like, well, I can work. So if you'll steer, maybe we only have to do things once or twice.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's part of what I've been sharing with this platform is like, you got to get your values straight. Like, that's a good foundation when you get started. But then you also need to have that vision, as long as you know where you're going. So what got you into doing this public speaking?
It wasn't exactly the plan to do all this. It just kind of worked out that way. So I started teaching seminary, and that was way back at the turn of the millennium, right? 2002. And I had worked for EFY previously, and they said, hey, do you want to come back and speak for us? And I said, sure, that would be fun. That was around 2000, probably 2004, 2005. And then from there, Education Week, BYU Education Week said, why don't you come teach for us? And then, I was teaching Education Week, and usually when you teach at something like that, it's like the homeschooling conference. People will come up afterwards and talk with you and just say they liked it, or some people will come up and tell you they hated it. That happens occasionally. I spoke at this youth class, and this adult man was in line waiting to talk to me, and I thought, oh no, right, he's going to tell me how much he hated my talk. And he said his name was Phil, and he was from Covenant, which is a part of Deseret Book, and they'd like to record some of my talks. And I thought, why? And he said, maybe someone will want to listen to it. And so we did one, and it went well. It was called Thou Shalt Be Nice. It came out in 2009. And I thought that might be it, but it wasn't. They asked for another one because that one did okay. I think we just finished number 22. Once that happened, then all the invitations started coming in.
It's a variety of topics.
I have my pet projects that I like to speak on. My doctorate degree was in high trust relationships.
What does high trust relationships mean?
So I looked at schools mainly and wanted to talk and really wanted to see why some schools were really high trust. Teachers trusted each other. Teachers trusted the principals. The parents trusted the teachers, right? So we went in and we looked at why some schools didn't, right? Why did those relationships not work? And how did those, and does that affect student achievement, test scores and things like that? And so that was my project for 3.5 years, was going into these schools and looking at the relationships. The dissertation ended and all the results came through. And then I was able to turn the principles that I learned into, pretty much all relationships, marriages, family, parents and children. All the principles are pretty much the same.
What is a common thread in high trust relationships that creates that trust?
Oh, wonderful. I'm glad you asked. It came down, really, I narrowed it down to four what we call like four facets of a relationship. The first would be compassion. Compassion is, I know that you care about me as a person, that you want me to succeed. So that's what it looks like in business, in a marriage, right? That you love me as a child, that you love me, and that you have my best interest in mind, that you're not using me for some of your own gain, right? And that you'll get rid of me once you served your purposes. That's compassion. Has a lot to do with benevolence and just kindness. The second one is openness. Like, we discuss things. Our communication is open, that we can discuss difficult topics, that we can give each other feedback. We're open to receiving feedback from me. Right. And, sometimes as a child, we might not think our parents are, or we might show our children we're not all that interested in their feedback. Not criticism per se, but advice can only flow in one direction, right? From parent to child. When our children can actually be great sources of feedback. So that's openness, the idea that I'm open and that also that I keep confidential things confidential, right? That's part of openness, that you tell me something and I, in confidence, and I keep it. So I can trust you in that way. The third one is reliability. And that has to do with like your predictability, that you come through consistently. So we all have good friends that come through once a year, or once every 2 years. And you really don't trust those people. You're grateful for them, but you really can't trust them because you just never know when they're going to be there. So that's reliability. And as a parent, I often talk, when I talk to parents, I often say, you don't have to be the best parent or the funniest parent or the best looking parent. If you could shoot for anything, be the most reliable and predictable, because people trust predictability. I'll ask people, what's the tallest geyser in Yellowstone National Park? And they'll say Old Faithful. And I always say, it's actually not. It's Steamboat Geyser is the tallest geyser in Yellowstone. But nobody ever talks about Steamboat. How come? Because no one knows when it's going to erupt. In fact, it's never even been seen live. They have a motion sensor camera on it so you can see it when it erupts, but no one's actually ever been there. One time it had 72 seconds between eruptions, and one time it went like 54 years between eruptions. So nobody knows. So nobody goes over there. Everybody goes to Old Faithful. Why? It's not the tallest, but it is the most reliable, right? It's predictable. So I trust it. And I can invest in predictability. And then the last one, so we've done compassion, openness, reliability. And the last one I talk about is usually expertise. I trust you because you know what you're doing. I trust you because you're insightful. We all have people that we know love us, that are open, that are reliable, but just don't know what they're doing. So we don't trust them. Think about a pilot. If a pilot said he loved you and he was going to be open with you and he's going to leave on time, he's going to be reliable, but he didn't know what he was doing, you wouldn't. You'd be like, no, I need you to know what you're doing. And that's something with our teenagers, right? We can trust that they love us, that they're open, that they're reliable, but we maybe don't trust their judgment just yet. And that helps, right? When my teenage daughter says, why don't you trust me? I can say, I trust your character. I just don't trust your judgment. So there's a difference there, right? That I know you'll do the right thing. I just don't know if you know what the right thing is. So we're going to, I'm going to help you in that regard. I'll trust you to a certain degree. What's fun then is if you look at any relationship and see if it's struggling, it probably comes down to one of these four things. I don't think you love me, compassion, so I don't trust you. I don't think you're open with me. You're hiding things from me. I can't trust you. You're not reliable. I can't trust you because you're not predictable. Or the last one, I can't trust you because you're just not competent in whatever it is I'm asking you to do. And that way, instead of just screaming, or getting upset, we can actually pinpoint where's the problem. And then we can remedy each one. So if the problem is compassion, we can talk about how to build compassion. If the problem is openness, we can build each one instead of, it's kind of like you can see where the smoke is, but let's find out where the actual fire is.
Yeah, I loved everything. That was awesome. And how it's, your story about your daughter and how she doesn't quite have the expertise. Well, that's why as parents, we mentor our children, we talk with them, we teach them, and help them to learn how to cultivate that judgment and things like that. But with an open mind, openness to be able to have a conversation and feedback. So I like that. Every single one of those, I get that. I think a lot of people, when they hear trust, they think reliability, that I rely on this person, but for what? I rely on them for compassion, rely on them for openness, rely on them for consistency and for experience, and I like that it's a framework for, like you said, every kind of organization, that if families want to work on their culture, that this is what culture comes down to, that the trust, that if you're cultivating a family culture of trust, then you look at each four of these components and you look at how can I be more compassionate, more open, more reliable, more trustworthy, more have the expertise. That's what's going to really shape your family culture.
Yeah. So when I talk to a business, if I talk to a business or I talk to at a marriage conference, I can come back to these four things and say, right. And I like that because they apply in a variety of settings. And it feels like, well, if you work on one relationship, if you're becoming more compassionate, you're actually blessing all of your relationships, right? Mm-hmm. If you become more reliable, you're blessing all of your relationships at work, at home, in marriage, extended family, things like that. So that's why I liked it.
How do you help your teenagers or enter into a relationship? How do you gauge how open you should be in order to foster that trust? Yeah,
starting when they're young is ideal, right? The idea is that we get used to talking in this family. We might talk in the beginning about Candyland or, Phineas and Ferb, but we talk. That's why we play Candyland or whatever when they're young. It's not necessarily because we love Candyland. Why do we do it? It's because we're building this relationship, right? And we're building this idea of openness. That's ideal. Now, let's say you can do that because your child's a teenager now. How do we help them become more open? I think we don't drive things underground. See, oftentimes as parents, the way we react to information drives the information underground. In one study I read, it said that higher performing nursing units report higher rates of mistakes. Now that's pretty fascinating, right? Higher performing nursing units, the ones that are doing the best, report higher rates of mistakes. So as you look at the study, you find out that it wasn't that they committed more mistakes, they just reported more mistakes. The nursing units that were the most successful were the ones who actually had this idea of openness. And these are real mistakes, right? Like I gave someone the wrong medication. I gave them the wrong dose. Well, why don't those nurses in lower performing nursing units, why don't they admit their mistakes? It's fear. I'm just too scared, right? I'm hoping it will just blow over so I don't get in trouble. So if you think about that with parents and children, I think want to share in general, but they're terrified, right? Or they're scared of getting in trouble. One guy I talked to said he knew there was things going on. He had a couple of teenage daughters and he knew there was things going on in the house he did not know. He said that conversations would stop when he came in the room, right? So he's like, what's going on? So he wanted to create more openness in his family. So he put a little notice up on the fridge that said, this Friday at 5:00, Dad will be on his bed. You can tell him anything and there will be zero punishments. Now, I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea, but He said when he got there at 5:00 on Friday, there was a line outside his bedroom where his 4 teenage daughters had all lined up, wanted to even put her backpack down to save her spot. And as they each came in and talked to him and told him things, he was like very shocked to learn. One was sneaking out and felt bad about it, but wanted to tell him, but why didn't you tell me? Well, I was scared you'd ground me forever, but now you can't because you promised, right? And he's like, okay, wow. Now what he did there, you could say, well, that's right or wrong. And what he was trying to do was bring things up on the surface. Let's talk about them. In this house, we make mistakes. In this house, we talk about our mistakes. There are opportunities to learn. I think as a parent, if you really want to drive mistakes underground, you punish voluntary confession. You punish voluntary confession, that pretty much tells everyone in the house, don't confess because you'll get punished, right? So somehow as a parent, it's very difficult to do. You have to reward voluntary confession. It has to be rewarded because that's what we want. As a parent, my idea isn't, well, if I punish my kids enough, they'll stop making mistakes. You can't flog people into good character. So what I do then is I say, okay, the best way they're going to get through life is if they have me at least on their side, not hiding mistakes. So we just reward voluntary confession as much as possible. And it seems kind of difficult because sometimes you're like really mad. You're like, I can't believe you did that. And I want to punish you for that. And there is always consequences. We don't take away consequences, but I would much rather have my kids talk to me than make sure I get all their punishments right. I learned about one guy in NASA who actually promoted a guy who made a big mistake. He almost sent a missile in the wrong direction or something. And he came in and he told his boss about it. And the boss was getting all the PR flack, right? Everyone's calling for this guy's job. And this kid comes in and says, I did that. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I went back and looked. I totally made that mistake. Pack my things, right? You'll never see me again. And instead the guy gives him a promotion. And they asked him why. Why would you give promotion? His name is Werner von Braun. He said, quote, absolute honesty is something you simply cannot afford to dispense with in a team effort as difficult of that as missile development. Right? Why would I punish honesty? That's going to tell everyone to hide mistakes. But think about that when it comes to family. Absolute honesty is something you simply cannot afford to dispense with in a team effort as difficult of that as families. We already live in a difficult enough world. We cannot leave our kids to fend for themselves because they're scared of talking to us.
I love it because we're going to be talking a little bit more about mental health issues and the things that our kids are struggling with. But before we go into that, I just want to share this one comment that I recently did an interview. We were talking about this type of thing in general, just talking about how when our kids come to us and they confess, then they violated one of our expected values. But the value that it takes priority. So this is about ranking our values, basically, in a way that, yes, they broke that value that we expected, but the higher value that almost trumps that is our relationship and the compassion and the openness and honesty. That should be the top priority is, that if your child is coming to you and with a confession, then your relationship trumps whatever it is that they violated, and so that you can talk about it, so that you can have an open discussion about it, make it a teaching opportunity rather than a punishment opportunity.
Right. It's heroic. Opening up about a mistake is pretty heroic. Going to someone and saying, I made a mistake. That's a pretty incredible thing, especially for a young person to do. Yeah. Adults have a hard enough time doing this sort of thing. So I just would be very wary of shutting that down with any sort of negative response. And it's hard, right? When I remember once my daughter came and said, Dad, I think I made a mistake. She's just little. And she'd drawn all over the cupboards with a permanent marker, right? And you're like, oh, fantastic. And you want to just flip out and be like, we paid a lot of money for these and we're new. All right. But instead I'm like, thank you so much for telling me. I love that. Let's get ice cream because you told me. And I just love how you told me. We talked about that over and over. You came to me and she's so proud of herself, right? She's so happy. And then we cleaned together. I'm hoping that was one of my good moments, right? I had plenty of bad ones, but it's one of those good moments where you're hoping that, wow, when you talk to mom or when you talk to dad, they're happy. It's a positive experience.
And it diffuses that fear. That fear of, that like you're talking about with the nurses, that if you have that openness, it will diffuse the fear of punishment, fear that a mistake, or fear of whatever it is they're afraid of. And so,
shame. There's a lot of shame.
Yeah.
Mistake. There's a really just a tragic story out of Utah Valley University where a young man had made a mistake online. Some people had asked him for some pictures of himself, and they were posing as a young woman, but they weren't. They were a group of guys who wanted to basically blackmail him. So he sent the pictures, and then they let him know, hey, we have these pictures of you now. We need this much money. He's made a big mistake. You would hope that there was somebody that he could say, you know what? They won't shame me. I can go talk to them. He ended up not having anyone like that, or at least he didn't feel that way. And he ended up taking his own life. That's the hard part, is we hide things we're ashamed of, where, and I'm not a big fan of like putting things you're ashamed of on social media, right? That's not what we're after, but we need to have people in our life that we know that we can tell things to, and they love us. It doesn't change how I feel about you. That's a big part of creating openness. And when we talk about mental health, sometimes our kids feel ashamed that they're sad. We're a very religious family. We're very happy. My parents, have a very good reputation, and here I'm not feeling good. I better hide it. I better just put my mask on and smile. And the scariest part is with most teenage suicides, most often it's parents and friends saying, I had no idea. I knew they were struggling a little bit, but I had no idea that they were struggling that much. And for some reason, there's a shame to this. There's this shame to being depressed or having anxiety, that somehow you're a weak individual, or somehow you're not living up to expectations. And so I'm going to hide that. I'm just going to deal with it myself, when it's not something to be dealt with alone, right? We wouldn't do that with any other problem, medical problem, cancer. If you had a broken leg, you would be like, well, I'm just going to keep this to myself. I'm just going to try to deal with my cancer on my own. There's no shame in those, but for some reason we've attached some shame to this. It's just devastating for a young person who has to try to deal with these things on their own, all at the same time, while pretending they're okay. To teachers and family and friends, they just smile, and they're good actors. They're incredible actors and actresses. They can pretend that they're fine until finally it all comes crashing down because they can't do it anymore. So anything we can do to just talk to our kids about, how are you feeling? If you ever feel depressed, and here's what depression feels like, right? Chapter 6, I wrote a book called Be Happy. And one thing that I wanted was this idea of, let's talk about what it is, first of all, right? Because a couple of days of sadness, that's not depression. That's called life. It happens to everyone. And we need to raise resilient kids. If your sadness is going on for weeks and then months, and you're not interested in things you used to be interested in, and you're waking up with kind of a pit in your stomach type despair, or you're scared of things and you have nothing to be scared of, right? That's anxiety. You're terrified, but you don't know what to be terrified of. I say this to my son or my daughter: if you're feeling that way, please come talk to me. It's happening more and more, and no one really knows why. Everyone has their own idea of why it's happening, but you've got to come talk to me. Like, it's okay to come talk to me. I don't want you to be ashamed. In fact, I've felt that way before in my life. Come talk to me. Come let me know. Just come and say, hey, let's go. Dad, do you want to go get a milkshake? We'll talk about this. So you just don't have to face it all by yourself. It's a terrifying idea, facing it all alone at the same time, trying to navigate a teenage life, right? It's just overwhelming. Yeah. It's just too much.
Yeah. So I noticed there's at least 3 things that you pointed out to cultivate this openness, especially talking about mental health. Is first, you mentioned earlier, but not just starting early. Even if you can't start early, start doing things that open up the conversation in general. Like if you're sitting there playing games together, you're driving together, you're going to get ice cream together, those things cultivate that openness in your relationship. The second thing was talking to your children about the mental health itself, helping them to recognize what mental health conditions look like, and that they're normal, or that, that it's common, or that it's not something to be ashamed of. And then the third thing was that you talked about your own experiences with it, so that they know that they're not alone.
It's okay to feel this way. A lot of us are roughly the same age, where we grew up in the 80s and 90s, right? And our kids are growing up in the 2010s and 20s. There's definitely been a transition between those 2 time periods when it comes to mental health problems. They're skyrocketing basically from, the mid 90s on. So what worked for us is probably not going to work for them, right? When I was a kid, if I got sad, my dad said, well, you just need a hard day's work. Get outside and get a glass of water. And that was really probably what I needed at the time, was just, he would call it a swift kick in the pants, right? And that worked for us. But I think that it would be really just wrong to think that that's what's going to work for these kids, because it's different. So there's something going on, really, like I said before, nobody knows what it is, that we've got to be much more careful. We're talking, when you and I were kids, 1 in 20, 1 in 25 teenagers had a mental health, some sort of problem. And now we're looking at 1 of 4. 1 of 3. There's definitely something happening. You can give your reason for it happening, but you can't deny that it's happening. So I think we've got to be careful as parents to say, well, this is what worked for me, so I'm going to give that to them. It's just not, I just don't think it's the same thing. We're not dealing with the same thing as we did. And we might say, well, they're entitled, or they're just spoiled, and whatever it is, I don't care what you call it. Dealing it with the way our parents dealt with us is probably not going to work. We're just probably going to end up driving them into kind of the shadows of, keeping it to themselves. If we do the same thing, if we say, give them that swift kick in the pants, then you're really shutting off that openness component of the relationship. I think it really does come down to the compassion then, in that sense, that, and the reliability and expertise as well. But, and when our children are experiencing things, or we're just in a place where we're actually, just being more observant. Like you said, there's so many different components. There's so many different reasons. Everybody has a different philosophy or theory about why it's happening. But as parents, individual parents, just being more observant of our individual children, what they're going through, to be able to help to discern what the remedy will be in their unique situation. Absolutely. See, when it comes to compassion, there's 2 ways, really. There's 2 ways to show compassion to your children. One is to give them your time, and the other is to give them your undivided attention. So when it comes to time, right, your kids know that time is important to you. It's the one thing that you don't have enough of. And so when you give them your time, that sends the message that they're important. My dad is super busy. He's all, flying over the country. He's speaking all over. He's got podcasts with incredible people, and he's going to give me the full day. He's going to give me this afternoon. So we've done that as a family. We've said, okay, we're going to make sure we're going to, I like what you say about being deliberate, about intentionally creating this. What we've done as a family is we've said, okay, the 20th of every month, she was born in February, but the 20th of every month is her day. So she's going to have time with either me or my wife or both of us, just all to herself. It's just going to be a few hours, right? And sometimes I can't be there, and sometimes it's more my wife, but we'll go to lunch. We'll go somewhere you want to go. We'll go, it's not expensive. It's not something that's, it's just, she can count on this important time going to her. And the same with all of my boys. They look forward to their day every month. And it's a message. It's a message of, you're important. You matter. And I'm not going to leave this for, hoping that I'm going to have time for you. I'm not going to leave it like that. I'm going to schedule it, because it's easy to say yes to more outside things when I don't have it on the schedule. So that's time. Just giving your children time. There's no such thing as quality time. Quality time happens during quantity time, right? You just can't schedule like, oh, now we're going to have a great relationship. If someone were to come to me and say, hey, teach my children how to get my children to trust me, I just don't want to spend any time with them. It's just impossible to have a good relationship with someone and not spend time with them. And it's the same thing with a marriage. The only way to keep the marriage healthy is to spend time together. But sometimes we don't put it first because we've got so many other things going on. The second is attention. Giving someone your attention is actually quite difficult to do. We just don't realize it. I developed a spectrum of listening. So on the far left, we'll say, is the worst form of listening, and that's false listening, where someone thinks you're listening, but you're not. And we all do this at times. We're busy doing something. In fact, men are much worse at this than women, because men have what's called a single task oriented brain. They're not stupid. When they're doing something, their entire brain goes to that one thing. Yeah. Women are much better at saying, keeping 4 or 5 windows open at the same time, being able to observe a lot of things. Let's say I've got my mind focused on one thing, I'm reading. Okay. And my wife comes in to talk to me, or my kids come in to talk to me. A tiny portion of my brain says to the bigger portion of my brain, do you hear that? The bigger portion of the brain just pushes everything away. If it's not life-threatening, push it away. So this tiny part of my brain basically says, okay, I'll just say, Well, out my mouth comes, yeah, sure, yeah. And I have no recollection of the conversation at all, right? So you'll have a conversation like this later, which is, we talked about this. No, we didn't. We didn't talk about, no, we did. We just talked about this. It was 3 hours ago. You said yes, right? No, I would never have said yes to that. And that's false listening. It's not a great form of listening. It really sends a really bad message of you're not important. Yeah. A little bit better than that is called selective listening, where I just listen for what I want to hear. I call it politics listening because, if you watch a debate, the politicians are listening to each other. What are they listening for? They're listening for problems, things they can grab onto, buzzwords, right? Instead of the actual message. So it's not a great form of listening. It's better than false listening, I guess, because you actually are paying attention. And then you move up into this center part of the spectrum, which is kind of this passive casual listening, where I multitask listen. So I've got my phone out, right? Have you ever been talking to someone and they're looking at their phone? So I'm kind of there. I'm kind of listening, but I'm also got my mind on, okay, I've got to, I'll look at that funny thing that happened in the news. What's the score of the game? And the message there, it's subtle, but it's quite devastating. And that is, let's say my son comes into my bedroom and I'm on my phone and he says, hey, Dad, guess what happened in swim today? And I kind of look at my phone, kind of look at him and say, yeah, what, bud? The message is you're not important. Now, I don't feel that way. I obviously love my son more than I love anything on my phone, but I'm not realizing the message that I'm sending, which is you're not important. And that sends him away. My wife, if I'm looking at my phone while she's talking, she just walks away. She's like, I'm not going to try. I'm not going to do this because I'm not going to compete. But a child doesn't know exactly how to do that. So all they know is something on that phone is super important. And I've got to try to be more important than that phone, which it's just a terrible message to send. We've just got to be more aware of the message we're sending. Right dead in the middle, I think, of the spectrum is content listening, where I listen for information. Men are actually really good at this. What time, where, what's the point? You're giving me all this information. There's got to be a point to it. In general, women don't communicate just to transfer information, communicate to bond, right? They communicate. We're just going to talk. My friend John, by the way, tells a funny story about, he said, I used to go to my mom's house and she would tell me what every one of my siblings were doing. He'd always think, okay, there's got to be a point to this. Like she's going to want me to do something at the end. And at the end, he'll say, so what do you want me to do? And she's like, well, nothing. I don't want you to do anything. He's like, well, why'd you tell me all that? Well, I just thought you'd like to know. He's like, no, I really don't want to know. Right. So it's the idea of content listening. Men are really good at this. If we start moving into better listening, like the good listening skills, we're now on the other side of the spectrum. Next would be like discriminative listening, where I'm not just listening for content, but I'm listening for how you gave me the content. So let's say that tonight I say to Sarah, my wife, like, hey, do you want to go see Iron Man 12, whatever they're on? And she says, sure. Now, if I'm a content listener, if I'm only listening for content, she said...
For nonverbals.
Yeah, she said yes, right? She said yes. Mm-hmm. But if I'm a discriminative listener, she actually said no. I'm listening for how the content was given. Now think about this with your kids. How was your day, right? It's not about what they say. It's how they say it. How are you feeling about whatever, this relationship, this game? I'm listening not for just what they say, but how they say it. I'm watching their body language. I'm watching where their eyes go when they talk to me. If they're looking down, like they're ashamed, if they're looking excited about something, that's discriminative listening. Even better is what the skill we learned called active listening. Mm-hmm. Active listening is where you have my attention. My phone is not in my pocket. It's not in my hands, right? Because even if my phone's in my pocket, if that thing buzzes while you're talking, my brain goes there, and all of a sudden I'm thinking, what is that? Is that an email? Is that the tickets I was ordering? What is that? So my phone goes away, and active listening, my shoulders face the person, my eyes are on them, and I am just, this is a lost art. Right? This is how our grandparents used to listen. We'd just be totally focused on the person that's right in front of us. And we're giving lots of feedback. Like, are you kidding? No. Are you serious? That's incredible. Right? And I'm just really with you. And what that does is that sends the message that you are important to me and what you're going through. And it doesn't have to, it doesn't matter what they're talking about, right? It can be talking about what happened in sixth period. It could be what happened at so-and-so's house, whatever. It doesn't have to be a crucial topic for me to be actively listening, because it's not just the topic I'm interested in, it's you as a person. So that's active listening. If we could get there as parents, we would just be blessing our lives, the lives of our family, the lives of our children by 100 times, because the message we're always sending. In fact, the funeral of Boyd Packer, he's a church leader. His son at his funeral said, I have a memory that whenever I walked into my dad's study, his den, and I say, hey, Dad, he would turn his whole body towards me and he would get eye to eye with me. So when I was little, he'd get down on one knee. If I was a teenager, he came down a little bit. When I got taller, he would try to, match me. And he would always say, what can I do for you? While looking right at them, right? And it's not so much that he was this servant. It was the message of, you are absolutely important. You are, so important to me. Yeah. Maybe one time that's nice. 2 times that's nice. But can you imagine getting that same response from a person time after time after time after time? You're reliable. You're compassionate. And now I know that you can be trusted. In fact, this son said when he got in trouble once for stealing the family car and wrecked it, you would think the last person he wants to talk to is his dad, right? But the police said, well, what are we going to do? And he said, I just want to talk to my dad. Now that is incredible, that I trust him so much that even though I did something that hurt him and hurt his property, he's the one person I want to talk to. He's going to be there for me. Now, I don't want your listeners to feel guilty, like, oh, I'm the worst parent. Listen, it was somebody's funeral. We always talk about people like they're brilliant at their funeral. Yeah. So the same thing will be said about you. We just need to try. The highest form of listening, and it's very difficult to get to. If you can actively listen, you're a great parent. But if you can get to the type of listening where I call it compassionate listening, it's the exact opposite of false listening. Compassionate listening is where I'm listening so closely that I try to feel what you feel. I try to see the world the way you see it. Because I've got a 15-year-old girl, and I've never been a 15-year-old girl. Despite what it says on the internet, I've never been a 15-year-old girl. And I don't know what that world is like. The only way for me to really know what her world is like is to focus in, right? To really try to see, how do you see the world? That means I've got to put away my own motives. I've got to put away my own agenda and just try to grasp what your world is like. And it's a gift. People that can compassionately listen have a lot of friends. And they have children who trust them, and they usually become therapists, right? Because I'll say it this way, what air is to the lungs, listening is to the soul. People just want to be heard. I've done this with businesses where I've said, we're going to try to compassionately listen for 10 minutes. I'll have them face each other and I'll say, okay, you got 10 minutes. We're just going to practice listening. Doesn't matter what they talk about. And there's people within 6 or 7 minutes who are in tears because it feels so good to be heard. And to be understood and validated as a person. And some of our children haven't felt that because we want to fix them.
I love that spectrum. Something you said, especially about active listening, you said to see them as a person. It's not about what they're saying necessarily. I mean, you want to hear what they're saying, obviously, but you want to, because you love them as a person, you care about them as a person. I really like this one book. It's called The Anatomy of Peace. So it talks about how it's like, you see people as people, not just objects to be manipulated or anything like that. That really speaks to that compassionate listening, because you have to put away your agenda. Like you said, we want to fix our kids. And I did a whole interview with a social worker and we talked about this, about how it's like, when we our kids come to us, they have problems, they have questions, we come back at them with our agenda, and how that totally,
here's all our solutions. Yeah.
Well, that invalidates them. That invalidates what they're saying, what they're asking us about. And so we just need to stop and just listen, be willing to set that agenda.
One thing I would tell your listeners, I'd say, one, you have to practice. You just have to put it on your list of things to do, is to practice. And then just flat out tell your family you're practicing. They'll just think it's odd that you're so intently listening to them. Like, why are you doing? Well, I'm just listening. No, you're not. You're being weird. Just flat out tell your kids, hey, I have a goal to become a better listener. So you're going to be seeing me do this. right? And I'm going to really try hard to be a better listener. So just let them know what's happening. In fact, you might even say, hey, I need someone to help practice with. Can you give me 15 minutes or 10 minutes? Will you just talk to me and I'm going to practice listening? I do this with my wife and my children. And the first few minutes, it's a little weird, right? Because I'm so intently listening. But what happens after a few minutes is they get very comfortable and they realize they have my full attention. And so they open up. Everyone walks away from the interaction feeling good. And I didn't lie to them. Yeah. I didn't try to say, well, talk to me here. I just flat out told them, hey, I'm practicing.
I like that because you're allowing yourself to say, you know what, I'm being open. I'm being vulnerable too by saying that I'm flawed. I'm not perfect here. I want to come to you and let you know that this is what I'm working on. And yeah, I can see that double-edged benefit there. Yeah. You're learning from them and you're learning.
Dad's trying. Dad realizes that he's not a good listener and he's really trying to become one. That sends a message in and of itself. And I'm not. I get to content listening, maybe a little discriminative listening, and that's about as high as I can get because I've got so many things going on. But I really want to get better at this because I realize the incredible benefit that comes from it. You don't want people to think that one moment is going to change a relationship, right? That I listened to them and it totally didn't change. There's still a problem. This is not going to happen. I think of these things, everything we've been talking about today, I think of them as brush strokes. So if you look at a masterpiece, look at a painting, and you look at the amount of brush strokes that go into a masterpiece. They're just innumerable almost. None of which in isolation is very impressive, right? Like if you were to take one of the yellow brush strokes from Starry Night and look at it, you wouldn't see anything impressive about it. It's just a single brush stroke. There isn't a single brush stroke on the entire painting that made it incredible. It's all of them put together at the right place on the canvas. And that's really what good parenting is, I would say. It's brush strokes. It's tiny little things, and none of which by themselves look all that impressive. Like, wow, that really changed our world, right? What we did right there. But can you see that day after day after day of doing these small things, right? These little insignificant things make a huge difference over time. If your listeners are like, hey, I'm going to try listening and I'll give it a day or two and see if it works. See if my kid turns around or my marriage turns around. That's not what this is. This is listening. I would bet listening to your podcast, you're going to find little tiny brushstrokes that make a huge difference over time. And it's like anything else. Think about exercise, right? There's no one session of exercise that people go, that was it. That was the session that got me in shape. No, it wasn't. It was almost imperceptible changes over a long period of time. And it's the same way with our relationships. I like to call it kind of the art of relationships is found in the brushstrokes.
And that goes back to the reliability aspect of your 4 components. If you just every once in a while, you practice listening, then it's hit or miss. And they're not going to know when you're actually going to listen this time.
I can't trust that. You're not predictable.
Yeah. I think that is another thing why I like that story about Elder Packer is that his son knew that he was consistent. And that's why he could trust him. Yeah.
And we're not going to be 100% consistent all the time. So what do we do when we're not? What happens when we blow up, when we get frustrated? You have to acknowledge it. You have to go to your children or your spouse and say, listen, I know that I blew up. I did the wrong thing. I'm sorry, right? That means you're still consistent because you realize when you weren't.
Right. But that shows that's a two-way street. This whole conversation we're talking about our children being willing to come to us to confess and be vulnerable. But if we never go to them to confess and say, I'm sorry, then they're not going to know what that even looks like, or that closes that door. It's got to be a two-way.
Yeah. How do they learn how to do it? If you look, one of my favorite scriptures is in the New Testament when Jesus says the apostles one of them is going to betray him, right? And they all look around. If it would have been me, I honestly would have just been looking around the room going, I bet it's Peter, or I bet it's, James. I guarantee it's, whoever, Andrew. But they all turn and say, Lord, is it I? And I think that little statement in relationships can go a long way. Lord, is it me? Am I the problem? Now, I'm not saying that you are the problem in every one of your relationships. It's not a guilt trip. That's not what this is about. But man, if we can show our spouse and our children that we look inward first in any conflict, we say, what part did I play in this? Because teenagers just don't naturally do this. I have yet to meet a teenager who goes up to their room and then comes back down and says, well, I've been thinking about my part in this problem, right? And it's not a natural thing to do. We naturally blame. So if you can say that, I've been thinking about my part in this, and I can see how I did this, this, and this. It's not manipulative. I'm not trying to get you to do it. I'm just saying, this is what I do first. I look at myself and realize that, yes, I contributed to this in these ways. Then all of a sudden, the model is there for them. They might not take it the first time I show them this, or even the 10th time I show them this, but eventually they start to realize, wow, in a conflict, I need to look inward first and outward second. And that's just a life skill. Our children, if they're going to be successful, they have to have that skill of looking inward, because blame will only get you so far, especially in marriage, right? Blaming in marriage is pretty fruitless. If we want our kids to have successful marriages, they need to be able to look at themselves first and say, what part am I playing in this? They might not even be playing a part at all, but that's not what it's about. It's not about blame. It's about looking inward.
Oh, Hank, this has been so awesome. So cool that, just this idea of trust, I think it really does come back to, that's like the root of a lot of issues, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I just think with mental health issues, if your kids will be open enough to let you know if they're struggling, then you can get them to an expert. You don't have to, parents are not professional therapists and they're not medical doctors. It's just like any other medical problem. If your child had a medical problem, you would take them to an expert. Yeah. Right. And you would be with them every step of the way. If your child had diabetes, you would take them to an expert. You wouldn't say, okay, we're going to figure this out on our own. No, you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that with any other medical problem. And with this medical problem, depression and anxiety, is if they'll be open with you, you've won, because now you can take them to an expert and you can say, okay, I am not giving up on you, and we're going to go find a solution to this, because there are solutions. That's the sad part about mental illness, is there's so many solutions available, but either one, I keep it to myself, or two, the people that I trust, my parents, let's say, if I'm a teenager, they just want to take care of this on their own. If we can switch our paradigm, this is a medical problem that needs professionals, right? Go to one that you trust. If you don't like the way a certain doctor handles it, well, go to a different doctor. You would do that with any other medical problem. And hopefully, almost every case that I've talked about, people get the help they need. It's the secrecy of it we have to get rid of.
Thank you for your message, going around and talking about this, helping to erase the stigma that people have to endure that have mental health issues on their own, and talking about this, your message about trust and about reaching out, don't be alone. Nobody should ever have to face anything, like you said, alone. Where can people find you to connect with you on social media?
Yeah, so I have my three main platforms are Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. On Facebook, it's Hank Smith CDs. On the others, it's just Hank R. Smith, HankRSmith. Pretty easy to find.
Thank you so much, Hank.
Okay, you're awesome. Thanks, Jody.
That's so cool. I love learning about the different aspects of developing trust relationships, what it really means to have trust. And one of the things that I have developed is a mini mastermind course of how to develop our core values and understanding what behaviors and things that we believe are important speak to our core values and how we reinforce those core values by our behaviors. I also created this cool infographic of the communication listening spectrum that Hank Smith talked about in this episode, so that you can see how our communication skills, our listening skills progress and evolve, from being a false listener to being not just an active listener, but being a compassionate listener. And so learning and understanding what that means so that you can practice it and implement it into your family culture. So go check that out in my show notes at homeandfamilyculture.com, and come follow me on Instagram at Family Culture Podcast. and also on Facebook at Family Culture Podcast as well. I am also announcing that my course for developing your family culture strategies is finally available. In the past, I called it coping strategies, but what it really is a roadmap to success. It's really strategies for anticipating and preparing for the struggles and the stresses and the things that are like roadblocks and detours as we navigate our family culture. So again, you can check that out at homeandfamilyculture.com, or you can go directly to the sales page, which is www.ourmodernheritage.com/30-day-challenge. So thank you so much for following along. Thank you so much for listening. And remember that Mother Teresa once said, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family.